For a couple years now, my friend and I have been talking about customizing his wagon so he can use it to pull around his two little girls at the hot rod car shows. I kind of knew what ideas he had, and I kind of had some ideas myself. Now that my car is in the paint shop getting a full repaint, I decided I had enough time to take on this project and do the best I can, since I didn't have a car to work on. The first thing I did was got it cleaned up, but not too clean. We didn't want to fully restore it. We wanted to keep it the way it was. So there were some things in there like cement and rust that we wanted to keep. So I just cleaned it up so it would be safe enough to deal with. The next step was breaking the wagon down. First thing is to get the wheels off. The wheels are held on by what they call push nuts. And you can easily buy a set of replacement push nuts from any hardware store or anything like that, but I decided I wanted to keep them and reuse them. So what I did is I got a couple screwdrivers in there and started prying it out. The error in that is I used the plastic wheel to pry against to pry it out, so I kind of marred up and messed up the wheels. Later on you'll see how I sanded those down and reshaped them to make the wheels look perfect again. So there are YouTube videos out there on how to remove these push nuts in a better manner without marring up your wheel. You may want to refer to those. But got the wheels off. Then I removed the whole rear axle assembly. Saved the nuts and bolts in a secure place. As you can see, the bottom of the wagon was in good condition. After breaking it all completely down, I did some work on the pan part or whatever it is of the wagon to make it flat and straight. It's been used for a lot of stuff and abused, so it needed a little body work. As you've seen in other people's wagons, that you need a frame to weld your drop axle to, so you're not welding to the pan of the wagon and messing up the paint. I fortunately found this old kid's bed frame in the junk pile in my neighbor's yard. So I stripped it down and used that for the frame for the wagon. Popping off all those springs that hold that spring part on there was easy. And I decided to leave those little wing leg things on there because they were installed and pretty sturdy. I could use them for something, I think. So cutting that square frame to a smaller frame, it takes a lot of measurements and planning on how you're going to do it. I wanted to make sure that that frame would cover the bolt holes that held the old components in place, so I could still use those to bolt the frame to the pan, but still have it square and have the under frame in an area where I could put the new drop axles in place. So it was a lot of planning, measuring, and trying before I made the cuts on this bed frame because I only had one and I didn't want to make it look ugly cutting and welding. So I got the right cuts, and now I welded those pieces together to make a perfect square, a perfect under frame for this wagon. I'm happy that turned out right, so I didn't have to replan and figure something else out. On lowering this rear axle, I had the idea of making it an adjustable height. So I was going to just cut that piece and have it bolted to each other so you could slide it up and down to change the height. The rear axle is a solid axle, as you can see here, so I had to cut out that center part and then cut those pieces, and I was just going to weld it there so it would stick out and slide them up and down, but that idea just got too complicated and really wasn't going to work out. So I was stuck remapping this whole idea here. So what I did is I threw away those little pieces that had the axles on them, and then took that center part of the rear axle that I cut out and welded it, as you can see here in this next picture, that I took the rounded pieces and cut it the other way. Let's refer back to the other picture. So I just cut that big piece in half and flipped it around, as you can see here, and cut the edges off and put the center axles in. So this is upside down right now. It would sit with the pan tucked in under there. So if you imagine turning this upside down, the wheels would be kind of sticking out the sides of the pan of the wagon to get it low enough to really move a quarter inch off the ground. While I'm doing work, I also think about what I'm doing next. I mean, cutting, welding, you don't really need to use your thoughts in your brain to think about it. So I was thinking about the next thing, and the next thing was to extend the handle. Now that the wagon is lower to the ground, 8 inches lower, the handle needs to go back up so it can be held properly. Most people do the half-assed thing, and they get a broomstick and they cut that pole in the middle and put a broomstick in there to make it longer. Now that is just lazy. I figured I'd use these trailing arms off the rear axle to extend the handle up. See, now I'm using something that was from the wagon to make the wagon better. Not, hey, let's get an old broomstick and stick it in there. I think my plan is going to be better. Just got to work on it. Now, some people's ideas, like I've seen this one, an old leaf spring to extend the front turning assembly up in front of the wagon. You know, it's got a spring to it, so it helps the ride, and it also is low profile, so it keeps it low to the ground. So I decided I would go that way with that extension. Now these are the rear trailing arms, which is a piece of sheet metal folded in half. It would work great for the handle, but you could really pinch yourself and hurt yourself if that was squeezed together. So I had to put those two pieces together. I figured that I would drill holes in one side and just spot weld them in to hold it together. And it was a pretty good idea. It worked out pretty well. It would have been good, but as you can see, you know, drilling the holes, welding it in, filling it in, I could have ground it down, but there's still openings there, and it just wasn't perfect. So I needed to do more planning on that. I did the weld, and I think I'm going to think on this for a little bit. So here's the underframe with that extension on there, the right way up, so you drop the wagon pan in there and it looks good. So I decided on that handle that I would just fill in the welds, or fill in the seam where those two pieces touch together, and grind it down to make it look perfect, and which is a lot better, a lot safer, a lot smoother. Now that I got all the welds done, it's time to mock up the wagon, put it all back together, take a look at it, see if it's going in the direction which I wanted it to go. And it's looking pretty good. I think I like how I'm going on this. So here's without the pan. I think it looks good. I think I'm going to keep it like this, clean it up, paint it what needs to be painted, and not paint what doesn't need to be painted. And she's gonna be a runner. So need to do something with these wheels, like I told you before, and it certainly rides low. So here's this handle extension I was talking about. Got it all welded up nice and smooth, put the two pieces together. It looks great. Ground it down, smoothed it, sanded it. So I've got to paint it so it won't really rust. So got some primer on it, primer and everything. As you can see, it's welded in some places but slipped on in other places like it was originally done. The frame, things that needed painting, but things that didn't need painting didn't get painted because they will be taken care of the other way later on. Now to the wheels. Well, you can't take these tires and rims down to Discount Tire and have them remove it. So it's a lot of fighting, cussing, and screaming to pry these off because they're run flat tires. But I got them off all nice and safely, cleaned them up really good because I will need them clean later on. And voila, all the rims are now ready to be cleaned too because we're gonna paint these rims. So I wish it was easy on my car to clean as these rims were easy to clean. You just put them in a bucket on the workbench and scrub them up with a brush. And once they were all cleaned and dried, I got out the can of primer and primed them all down and let the primer dry overnight while I worked on other things. The other things to do is really get to painting since it's all mocked up and ready to go. So I painted that handle extension gloss black to match the gloss black that the other parts of the handle were, but it doesn't match. So I got out the chisel and I scraped off paint in a bunch of areas on the handle and beat it up a little bit, took it over to the neighbor's yard and started digging around in their yard with that handle side that was freshly painted. People thought I was weird using a wagon handle to dig in their yard, but I needed to do this. And then I went to my other neighbor's yard and pushed the rocks around a bit with them just to scar that freshly painted area up to make it match the rest of the handle so it would blend instead of like old beat up handle, new shiny handle. This wear and tear and scratching from the rocks represents, well, matches what this handle's been through before. Doing this, the mailman came by with the buttons for the upholstery. These are real Ralph Lauren buttons that I ordered. I'm going to do for this wagon. Just wait until you see that. I thought this was an excellent idea that I came up with for the wagon. Well, anyways, during the mock-up, I found that spring was too much and it wouldn't hold much weight and the front end would be dragging. So I added on another block, as you can see here, on the front spring to the front axle that was a piece cut off from the frame. This would bolt on to the original spot where the front axle turn assembly bolts to the pan to shorten the spring to make it so it can hold more weight. I cut the extension off the front wheels so they wouldn't stick out as much as the rear wheels, to give it that more hot rod look. And it was easy to cut, and it seems like it'll work out well, and it'll tuck in those front tires a little bit just to match. That was a simple plastic cut with a hacksaw to change that attitude a bit. I lined up all the holes that were originally on the pan of the wagon and drilled the holes in the frame so the frame could be bolted on with the original hardware to the wagon, and touched up some paint that I messed up under the frame area. Here you can see on the wheels, after sanding the primer down, where I kind of marred up the wheels a little bit trying to get those spring clips off. That's okay. I was able to sand these wheels down smooth and get that messed up. Before you do what you're going to do to remove the spring clips, remember this: what could happen to your wheels if you don't do it the right way. Just a tech tip. So on the upholstery, I decided to do a traditional lowrider biscuit tuck seat cushion. Now, I wasn't sure exactly how to do it, but I found this great tutorial from Eternal Rollers Lowrider Car Club. I'll put a link in the description to it there to show you how to do it. First, on the foam, which is a 4-inch foam, I drew out the squares for the biscuit and drew out the spacing which needed to be cut out for each biscuit in this foam. Getting your measurements great and drawing your lines perfect really helps guide the knife and make it straight so your biscuits look great. I mean, come on, man. You want a great looking biscuit, don't you? So with the razor blade, I cut out the notches in one direction. Now this is like a V cut that's, well, go to Eternal Rollers and look at their page for cutting and stuff. Let them tell you how to do it. That's where I learned it. But once I cut out these biscuits, I saved the foam, leftover foam, because you want to recycle. Use it for packing material for eBay sales items. And because the buttons are going to go all the way through the button strings, I use my Dremel tool to punch a hole on the other side at the intersections of those lines of the biscuit to put in the string for the buttons. And I did that, and I gotta wait for the fabric to come in before I do the rest of the job on that. So I moved over to prepping the wagon pan for painting. This is the wagon pan, how I got it after I cleaned it. I knocked out some of the flakes of paint, and the underside was quite good, so I didn't really touch it at all. There was a few pieces of paint peeling, and I super glued back down. And of course the sides with the logos, you don't really want to touch that because you don't want to buy another logo sticker. You want to use the factory ones that are painted on. So once that was all prepped, I busted out the paint. Yes, satin finish clear coat. We want this sucker to look original. So it's all the same paint, just a protective layer of satin clear coat to make it so you won't get your hands rusty or anything like that. So this is the handle that I extended and dirtied up. I sprayed it down with a little white vinegar, some other chemicals to get the rusting done faster. So once that area rusted up, I cleared that in to seal it all in so you can then handle it so your hands don't get dirty, but it looks old but factory fresh kind of use. So more work on the seat cushion. I'm gonna need a bottom board to tie the strings together, so I bought a thin piece of plywood and cut it to the shape of the wagon. And you have to cut and shape the corners so it'll fit perfectly down into the bottom of the wagon and have enough space so it's tight, but enough space so it won't scrape the edge of the wagon. So there was a lot of shaping, sanding, grinding, whatever it took to get this board to fit perfectly in the wagon. It was little measuring, little sanding, little cutting, little sanding, little cutting, little sanding, shaping, measuring, finding out that you can't put it in both directions. There's got to be a front and there's got to be a back. But once I got it done, it's time to spray adhesive the foam to the board. But before you do that, you got to put the holes and drill the holes through, because you don't want the drill grabbing onto your foam and tearing it up. So I put the foam on the board, marked where all the holes were going to be, and then slowly drilled every hole that the string and the button would go through. Once again, refer to the Eternal Rollers Car Club's website on how to do this kind of upholstery. They got a great little tutorial there for you. Now the holes are there and light goes through the holes, so that upholstery work part was done. And the paint for the wagon was dry. So look at that. Beautiful. Man, I should go into the automotive refinishing business. I mean, look at that. You can't even tell that I touched it. It looks factory, doesn't it? Well, used factory, worn out, but there it is. That's the paintwork for it. So now that I've got the holes drilled in, I was able to glue the foam to the board and have those holes perfectly line up. Next, you have to trim the foam that hangs out with the board. So get the long, sharp razor blade and slowly cut the foam so it will match the board so it will drop perfectly into the wagon. And make sure that you've got the front to the front and the back to the back, because your holes may be a little off. If you got it the other way, they're not going to go through. But I got that all cut and shaped perfectly onto the board. So I put a little finish onto that back side of the board because the string's going to go through there and you want to staple it and glue it down, and you don't want that end to get wet because it's going to be at the bottom of the wagon. So to let that dry, I focused back on these wheels again. Of course, these run flat wheels. Sanded them down so they're perfectly smooth, no bumps, because I was going to paint these wheels the wagon red. Once I sanded them down and figured that they would be perfectly smooth, I shot another layer of primer on it. Here's where the primer is wet, and look how smooth and perfect they are. Before, hey, look at that. Center cap shipment has just came in. So I also primed all the hardware that came off of there. Paint for the wheels are drying. And I then shot the wagon red on the wheels, on the hardware, both sides, front and back. So to keep fresh, I flipped back over to doing the upholstery work. To put these buttons in, I used a heavy-duty, mold-resistant twine to hold these buttons in, so this twine would last forever. I figured the length I'd need is about the length of a license plate, so I wrapped the twine around the license plate as many times as I needed, then cut the one end and threaded each button, stringing up through the button down to the other side. All these precious Ralph Lauren buttons were threaded and ready to go. Then I jumped over and decided to bolt the pan onto the frame. It was stressed, but I was able to get all the factory bolts back in and hold the frame to the wagon. So now in came the shipment of the 2 Teflon washers for the front steering axle. These 2 Teflon washers rubbing together don't create much friction at all, and we're able to do a bearing like for that front axle on that front spring tug to be able to make it turn both directions nice and smooth without making any modifications really to the height to keep the front end down low. Now remember, I used that satin clear coat to refinish that to keep this rust the way it is to make it look good, and also decided to put the front handle on. The front handle on is arced backwards from normally how it would go on. But I think that gives the wagon a lot more character, and is also a lot more comfortable for somebody that's pulling the wagon. I mean, I don't know why they didn't do it that way. So once I got that done, I decided to work on the center cap. Yes, the center caps are made out of Budweiser beer bottle cans. I figured that the color would match pretty good, and this would make this wagon stand out from the rest of them. So, cutting the tops of these beer bottle cans off was pretty simple. And now to make them so they'll fit in the hole and stay tight in there. So I got the diameter of the hole on the wheel, and I started cutting relief cuts so I could bend in the can so it would be straight with the hole and have a little spring out so it would stay tight to the hole. So just with the little nippers, cutting millions of cuts around, well, thousands, maybe hundreds, around there and folding it in on there. That took some time, just sitting around, cutting, bending, cutting, bending. So I decided to take a break and take a look at the wagon. Now the handle falls all the way down and hits on top of the wagon top. I didn't think that was cool, so I found this little bump stop and decided that I'd drill a hole right in the middle there where that turn arm is. Well, you can see the hole right there and the bump stop just above it on the sidewalk there. And drilled the hole in and threaded it so it could be height adjusted with the nut on the back, and that way it would keep the handle from rubbing against the wagon. There, it's done it back in its days, but now it's not going to do it anymore. A little bit cleaner, a little bit better, and that black bump stop really can't be seen in the dark or even in the sunlight. It almost looks factory original there, but kept it from hitting on the wagon, which I thought was just a little more classier to do it that way. It just rests right there, keeps it away from the wagon, and doesn't look bad at all. But still rusty, but clean and safe. Okay, the sun's going down. It's time to go inside and maybe do some upholstery work. So I got all those buttons threaded up, and I've got the foam to the board, and I got the upholstery in. So what I thought would be, hey, Fiesta Mexican blanket, just like all the rat rods do, but lowrider biscuit tuck with the Fiesta Mexican blanket. Just, I've never seen it done before. I think those two would go perfect together. But the right button, what color would you use? These are for some classy little girls, so why not some classy Louis Vuitton buttons on their wagon? So the first button I did smack in the middle, lined it up perfectly, had a special big needle to pop through there like you'll see on all the upholstery videos, and ran the string to the back side and pulled it through just tight enough but not too tight. You're going to have to learn this as you go. Then I pulled it tight and holded the back side. You can see the needle there that I used. It was a plastic needle. And bam, bam, shot it twice with a staple gun to hold that string in. And flip it back over, and there you can see the first button in this biscuit tuck upholstery job. Kind of stressful, so I figured I'd take a break and put the tires on. Tech tip right here. Get the tires damn hot to be able to stretch them on. I mean super hot. I wore gloves to do this. And also mask off your paint job on your rim. If you don't do that, you're going to do what I did here and dog up the paint job. So make sure you mask up your wheel. You're going to need it in. And make sure your hubcaps are ready, because we're going to put those on once we install the wheels. So I've got them all shaped, all ready to push right in there. But I think I'll get back to upholstery. So putting all the buttons, I did the center row right in the middle. Tight enough on the upholstery and tight enough pulling the buttons down to keep it straight, and also making sure these lines run perfectly with the biscuit so it's not going to get all wavy. Then I started the outside, front, back, left, right, then alternated left and right, and putting these buttons in. Then back to the wheels. You know, since you masked off the rims anyways, that was good, so it'll save you time, because I wanted white wall wheels, so I masked off the outside right to where that ridge is, where it would be like a white wall, and painted this with a gloss white paint so I could get the paint to adhere properly and stay for the longevity. Just white paint, enamel spray paint, and then let that dry. It's going to be too glossy and it's going to be too smooth. It's not going to look like a regular white wall, but I got a trick for that. So I'm going to let that paint dry and go back and put some more buttons in. Pulling the upholstery, keeping those lines straight, and sinking them in so they're tight and nice fluffy biscuits in there. Just how you want it. So I decided to take a break, go back out and work on those white walls. I got some white house primer paint. This paint was going to be flat enough and it would give me the ability to do the dry brush technique to get the real look of a white wall in there. So I brushed this flat white primer on in a circular motion. You'll see it better in the slide or two down the road. Well, now that those wheels are drying, I went back in and continued to do more buttons. Almost finished here. Just got a few more to go. Keeping that upholstery tight enough and keeping the buttons all level, pulled down enough, and keeping the lines straight so they don't get crooked. Kind of difficult. You get the skill as you go along on that. But she's looking good. All the buttons are in. Now that the masking tape has peeled off the wheels for the white wall, it's kind of raggedy. Some paint from the masking has stuck to the wheel and all that. So I got a razor blade in there and scraped off and cleaned off the paint to make it straight, and a little Q-tip with some white paint to make it cleaner and perfect, and lined it. So now the wheels are pretty much well done. Nice red wheels, nice thick white walls, black tires, looking pretty sharp. Can't wait to put the hubcaps in and see how that all goes together. So all four wheels done, painted, white walls. Of course the back sides don't have white walls on them, but the front sides do. Time to put some grease on the axles and put the wheels on. So those push spring clips, that when you take them off, they break or will crack in half, and they're all spread out. So I used the backside of a socket and hammered them flat again so they would work. And then fortunately I was able to use that same socket to hammer them on and hold the wheels on. So now the wheels are on and they're perfect. The amazing thing that this wagon is so low that you can even roll the wagon upside down. Yes, you can flip this over and there's like half-inch clearance between the wagon pan and the ground. And there we go. I got the center caps in and they look good. We'll get a closer look at them later. So back to the upholstery. Now that we've got the buttons holding the fabric down, we've got to wrap that fabric onto the inside. So I soaked that whole edge and around on the backboard with spray adhesive and let that settle, then brought it back inside so I could pull the fabric up and around there. And you've kind of got to pull it a little heavier where those cuts for the biscuits are, and a little lighter on the outsides. But you really got to work it and pull it, re-peel it, put it back on, peel it, put it back on, and work those corners until it looks perfect. Now it's got to look perfect on the top side, but not really on the underside, because you're going to cover that over anyways. Nobody's going to see that. So once I got all those corners and all those edges pulled perfect, I was able to glue it all down and cut away the leftover upholstery that was bulking up there. And now that's all pretty much well covered there, but I also want to put a protection over that because that's going to be rubbing against the bottom of the wagon. And the old rat rod way is to use old street signs and stuff to do that. I didn't need metal, but I wanted to stick with tradition, so why not an old sponsor banner to use to cover that. It's a good hard plastic with a nylon ripstop in it. So I cut that to shape, cleaned it up, got the corners perfect, and then sprayed that with spray adhesive, and sprayed the backside of the cushion with spray adhesive to stick those together to protect the backside from the bottom of the wagon. I also needed to make a pull handle to pull out that cushion so it could be cleaned or saved or anything. So I glued a couple pieces of fabric together, stapled it to the back before I put the backing on, and there we go. Perfect cushion with Mexican Fiesta blanket material and the old lowrider biscuit tuck to make a beautiful cushion that's soft, plush, and ready to go. So now the wagon's done. It's all put together, and here it is. This is what it looks like. So I'd like to thank Victor for bringing over his wagon while I was in a time of need. Not having my car to work on, I needed something to do. I'd also like to thank my mother for giving me advice on the upholstery work and ideas on other things on the wagon. I'd like to thank the mailman for putting in his 2 cents worth and his ideas on the wagon. I'd also like to thank Eternal Rollers Lowrider Club for giving that tutorial on the biscuit tuck upholstery, along with my buddy Will for giving me advice on welding practices and how to weld those pieces together. I hope you got some good ideas and tips on how to take your wagon to the next level.